Our second guest is Salman Abu Sita, who is himself a survivor of the Nakba and a champion of the refugee right of return, a right which he himself claims and which he argues compellingly is sacred, legal and feasible. Salman's autobiography, Mapping My Return, is lyrically elegiac and stirringly political. And I have to say that the story of his friend Nadeed and Nadeed's mother has stayed with me ever since I read it. Salman's magisterial Atlas of Palestine maps every inch of historic Palestine and is a gift to anyone who cares about the land. Now, Salman, we could spend hours on the Nakba, but could I ask you to address 3 points, beginning with a quotation, and this is it. JNF, through their great influence, directed the Israeli military operations for the conquest of Palestine, even before the British mandate ended and before the State of Israel was created. Could you explain what the role of the JNF was in that military process? And also, and Ilan's touched on this already, but perhaps you could take it further, the JNF claims that it legally, on its modern day website, it claims it legally bought and paid for all the land that it owns. How true is that? And finally, could you give your view on the impact that the JNF has had on the right of return, which is so important, and on the shape of the emerging state of Israel after the Nakba?
Thank you, Annie. Thank you for inviting me. And hello, my friend Ilan. We meet quite a number of times in this difficult time of Corona and May, the month of remembering Nakba. And Khulud, now I see you. We'll have to do something about the Atlas. We'll solve that problem. Thank you all for standing up for Palestine. I keep saying I am a selfish person. I fight all my life for my house and land which is taken away from you. But you all stand for me because of your conscience. And I thank you for that. The JNF actually, as Ilan has quite eloquently explained, is a tool of colonialism. It's a tool, actual tool, an important tool. But actually, it could have been taken to Nuremberg trials, which has taken place 3 years before 1948. As early as January 1948, the JNF, of course, in January, that was 6 months before the settlers' state was declared, JNF sat with the military experts and saying which land we should take first. We should take higher priority. We need this land urgently because it's surrounded by Arabs and so on. And actually, they worked a plan together as early as that to determine the exact location of new settlements and the priority of which area to take first and second. Why is that? Because they had developed a plan to settle, even at that time, when we're only 400,000 Jews in Palestine, to settle 1.5 million of Jews in Palestine. So the natural question is to ask, how did they plan to settle 1.5 million? Obviously, the answer is to get rid of as many Palestinians as possible, and also to take their land. Because at that time, the Jewish settlers have controlled only 5% of Palestine. So the obvious principle behind that is that we are going to dispossess and expel many Palestinians and cities. And they did, actually. For example, they directed the military operations, which resulted in Butayma. They gave the instructions to evacuate Butaymat. And Butaymat was a land was important to the JNF because it was somehow critical for them. Then they actually directed the occupation of Dalit al-Ruha. Before the British departure, they have a list of villages to be evicted, villages near Qira Khammun, and not only that, but to prevent their return by raising the houses of these villages, and as Ilan just said, to refuse the tenants to stay in the land in which they live. The Gawarna in Haifa Bay were also a direct victim of that, as I said, in addition to Dalit al-Ruha. And Qumia was very particularly important for them to do that. They also directed in the transfer committee on June 4, which is of course after the establishment of the state, destruction of the villages, prevention of cultivation of the land by the Palestinians, settlement of Jews, enacting legislation geared to barring their return, making propaganda aimed at non-return, that you'll be destroyed, there is nothing there. So also they have a direct hand in leveling of handful of villages like Al-Mughar, in Fajja, in Biyar Adas, in Beit Dajan, and Miska, and Sumaria, and Sabbarin, and the principle behind that is that not only they will evacuate or expel the population of these villages, but then they were instrumental in the process which followed, namely the demolishing of the houses in these villages. The first people to do that, after the army, of course, during the destruction, was the Public Works Department and the Jewish National Fund. They were trying to bring people to live in the depopulated villages. Many of them they found not suitable, and so they destroyed them. The destruction was deliberate and continuous. Actually, it was continuous until 1967 war. So it is a deliberate one. Then your point about they say they have legally obtained or gained or owned land. This is not true. During the British time, they managed to buy through British collusion 936,000 dunams. That's almost 1 million dunams out of Palestine's area, 27 million. But in December 1948, something unusual happened. Number one, in 10th of December 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights took place. The second day, 11th of December, the United Nations passed a famous resolution, which is still valid today, Resolution 194. And that resolution said that the refugees must go back. Now, Ben Gurion was taken aback. What can he do? At the time, Israel was not admitted to the United Nations. So he developed a ruse. He agreed with the Jewish National Fund to sell them the land he occupied in a fictitious sale. Why is that? The idea was that he will claim it is not in our hands. It's owned by the Jewish National Fund. And who is Jewish National Fund? It's an international organization which is found everywhere. The beneficiaries of the JNF is not a settler or two as in Australia. The beneficiary is a nebulous body, imaginary body called the Jewish people around the world. So go and chase them if you want this land. It belongs to these people around the world. There is no way to reach them. So his trick was to do that to avoid possible return of the refugees. And they agree that actually the amount of land was 2.2 million dunums, which is now in the hands of the kibbutz. They had a sale deed, which is of course fictitious and illegal. And there is, I have found no record of that the amount of money mentioned has ever been paid. But let me say something else here. The total amount which they have gained, yes, here it is. The JNF finally, and we have a map, by the way, on our website. The JNF in this period, after 1948, other than the British time, they had taken the land of 372 Palestinian villages. And their land is 6 million dunums. And the refugee population whose land taken over by JNF of today, they have taken the land of 55% of all the refugees today. So if there is a claim in the world courts, more than half of the Palestinian refugees will claim the money stolen or taken by JNF. Therefore, your court cases in Scotland is valid in more ways than one, because they actually stole the land of more than half the Palestinian refugees. And to conclude, I am one of those refugees. The JNF has taken my land. It's called Al Ma'in, 55,000 dunums, just east of Khan Yunis. So I have a claim, a personal claim against the JNF. And the right of return will be one way. I and 7 million Palestinians are fighting and will never give up to recover the land stolen by JNF and stolen by the so-called State of Israel. We will never give up on that. Thank you.